Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this sync session, one of our last of the day. My name is Alex Groh, Digital Strategy Manager here at Aprimo, and I'm so excited for this content coming up. Our session is on the intersection of modular content and compliance, led by Aprimo's Karen DeWolf, Industry VP of Life Sciences, and a special guest, Mark Davey, founder of IQ Equity. We'll hear from him as Ask the Expert at the end, so definitely stick around. In this session, we will cover what we call modular content, and that is how to maximize content, reuse and scale personalization to meet customer demand in the life science industry. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A chat. We will be covering them at the end in the last 10 minutes of the session. Now let's get started. I would like to welcome Karen DeWolf. Karen, please get on the virtual stage.
Hello, everyone. Alex, can you hear me okay? All right. I am very much looking forward to this session today. I think my topic of modular content is probably one of the most interesting that we've got this year. It's one of the most talked about, and I know that I'm really excited to go through this with you. And as Alex said, I've got a special guest in Mark Davey from IQ Equity, who is going to be here with me at the end. So I'm going to go through some concepts of modular content, what it is, what it means, how it works with compliance, some of the challenges that you may face. And Mark, in his very storied career in digital asset management and life sciences, is going to help us answer some questions at the end here, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot. So as Alex said, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, because this is an interesting topic. It's a hot topic. It's one everybody wants to know about, and there's a lot of questions from a lot of folks. So I'm very excited to go through this with you today. So thank you for your time. The first thing that I'd like to start with here is, why is modular content such a hot topic right now? And it is. It's being talked about in every industry, not just life sciences and biotech and pharma and med device. This is across the board. We're hearing about it. And our analysts here at Aprimo really believe that modular content and the concept of this is really being fueled by the fact that everybody has this increasing desire to be communicated with in a personal fashion, and not just in a personal fashion on a one-to-one basis. It's a many-to-one basis. It's a many-to-me, because I've got so many different channels that I consume content in. And when that's the case, how do you get your messages across? How do you make sure that all of your messages are getting to people in the channel that they're using and making them personal and making a connection with them? If you look at this statistic on your screen, you can see that 69% of customers are expecting that connected experience across all their brand's different channels, which means that you need to have an awful lot of data to support this. And something to keep in mind here, it's important to remember that when you're talking about personalizing and you're talking about giving people a personal message, you're not just talking about the data. Real personalization, when you get down to it, is the combination of all of that data that you have about the folks that you're trying to reach, as well as the content, because it's the marriage of the data and the content that is really creating those compelling experiences. So you have to find the right mix. You have to find the right recipe. Which content, which channel married with which data is going to drive that one compelling message. And when you've got all of those different components and all of those different elements, you need to start thinking about how much content you're creating. And do you have the capability to scale when you've got such an exponential amount of things that you're creating on a daily basis? And what we know today is that content isn't scaling across brands and regions and customers. And the reason for this is simply because we've got all of these different channels. We've got desktops, we've got iPads, we've got mobile, we've got social. We've got all these different things, but not only that, we've got geographical differences. We've got cultural differences. We've got all these different reasons. We've got global regulation and brand that we need to pay attention to. So you can't just take one piece of content and expect that that one piece of content is going to serve in all the places it needs to be used in every channel for every person in every region and every country. And this seems to be a problem across the board. Again, this isn't an industry vertical. This is something that we're seeing everywhere. And really what this is creating is that people have an enormous amount of data today. I thought this was interesting because if you look at the statistic on delivering content at scale, this is a big challenge. Look at this. More than 75% of life science surveyed leaders reported that they're, in their words, have moderate to enormous amounts of digital content, but only 13% of those feel like they manage it well. So it's no wonder that this industry is starving for a way to manage this. How do you take all of that enormity of content and what do you do with all of that content to make it so that it's more manageable, it's more usable, and it's something that you can have repurposed? And then how do you keep control of it? Once you have that much content, how do you have governance over it? How do you make sure that you know who's using it and that they're using it appropriately? All of this is the reason that modular content is a concept that everybody is now talking about. I call this slide a tale of two ineffective models in life sciences, because you've got two different ways that things have traditionally been done. In the first model here, you have that headquarters creates this content end to end, and they share it with the local markets and allow the local markets to customize, localize, and personalize this content that's been created on a global scale. The other way that you have this traditionally is that these local markets create their own end-to-end content, use their own assets, resources, and technology, and all of their own processes. Well, these don't really work in today's day and age. These are ineffective models, and they're ineffective because what you end up with is little to no content reuse. You're always starting from scratch, and that's not helpful from a number of different reasons. You certainly don't want to be creating all of your assets from scratch and doing it over and over again and paying for that. You also don't want to have your creatives' valuable time be utilized making things that may already exist. You can probably imagine why doing this has very long MLR review cycles. And the reason for this is that every time a piece is being created, you now have to have it go through the entire process, every element of that particular document, everything inside of it reviewed again. And if you've got the local markets doing this, you've got reviewers in region, in country, and they're all going through this MLR process in a vacuum. You don't have a centralized repository if you've got local markets creating and storing their own, or if headquarters is holding on to everything and all of those assets aren't made available to the local regions. You also don't have a global governance, and this is a problem that we've seen a lot of. No global governance means you don't have control over your assets. You can't go and find them easily. You can't pull them back easily. You don't know if your messages are consistent across the globe. All of this is going to increase your risk. And of course, what this also is going to do is it's going to make your time to market exponentially higher. So what we think here at Aprimo, and what our analysts and all of the folks here that have been working so hard on modular content strategy, from our chief product officer and all of our advocates, we feel like you can break through all of this with modular content. This gives you the capability inside of an application to take everything that you do today and break it down into content modules. And what this does is it allows you to have everything in one place and to distribute all of these things, all of the assets, all of the things that you've created to all of your local markets. So what do you do and how do you do it? There's two different schools of thought over here. You've got the traditional way, which we call the CRAFTSMAN way of building your content. Typically, it's highly custom, it's advanced skill sets, it's a slow process, there's a lot of potential for mistakes, it's hard to collaborate, reuse, and experiment with your content, and it's really hard to replicate and localize what you're doing. With a modular content approach, what you have the ability to do is treat all of your content blocks, your modules, as semi-structured customizable pieces of content, blocks of content, much like a Lego, that are pre-structured and can be created and put together to build a larger composite of an actual piece. You have the capability to have general skill sets because you're utilizing templates, approved templates, to put these blocks of content in. It's typically a much faster process. And it's a much faster process because you're utilizing templates and you're utilizing approved assets. You're also going to have fewer errors because you're taking the human element of making sure that you're choosing the right thing and you're only giving all of your creatives and your designers the items that are already approved. You're reducing that error. It's easier to collaborate and repurpose and experiment and localize your finished assets. And of course, with that localization, you have the capability for reuse. Think of this as the custom built as opposed to the pre-approved available templates where you can sort of drag and drop and pick the elements and the content that are right for you, for the piece that you're designing, for the channel that you're utilizing, and for the audience that you need this message to get to. There is a great need for modular content in life sciences. When you have a modular content strategy, you then have centrally created assets that have this global foundation. You're speaking the same truth across the globe. You've got modular approvals that are processed at the top. So when you push those assets down, all of your local and regional areas know that they're looking at content that has been approved by headquarters. You've got global brand messaging that is being made available for this local use. You have the ability to provide usage guidelines for adherence to compliance, and I'll get more into that in just a moment. Your local markets have the ability to choose this approved content in an approved template for faster delivery and a greatly reduced review time. And you can control access to all of this approved content. Again, you have the ability to control which assets folks can use, what region can they use it in, what channel is this particular module of content appropriate for. You have the capability to templatize by channel, and you can create the what we call risk metadata, which will allow you to prioritize higher profile review need and de-risk the things that are not as important from a review cycle. With a simple piece of metadata, you can say, this is something that needs an extra review, or this is something based on the type of content and the type of module this is. It's less of a risk and less needy of a very strict review process is what I'll call that. So using these pre-approved blocks of content is going to reduce not only your asset creation time, but that review and approval time as well. One question that we get a lot here, and I would be very surprised if we didn't get it today. If you're using approved blocks of content and you're using approved templates, does that then mean that you don't have to go through a review process? Do you skip that altogether? And what I can tell you is we're not avoiding a final sign-off, especially in life sciences, because how things are assembled is a factor. And we don't want to do that either. But we can make the job of the approvers much easier and much faster. And again, I'll get into that in just a moment as well. There's a couple of key principles when it comes to modular content in life sciences. It is that methodology of creating, managing, and distributing. You want to be able to create modular content from any content type. These are not just images and video. It's claims, it's blocks of text. All different types of things can be a module of content. You want to be able to create the process that you've got data-driven content decisions. Again, things like AI that will help you determine the right module to be used in the piece that you need to be, the piece that needs to be created. And you can build compound content using different modules. The next concept here is, how do you manage those content blocks? How do you explore the related content and the guidelines? How do you find it? How do you make sure that folks globally have access to all of this? And how do you manage the related content package elements? all important. When you're using modular content, you need to be able to track back and find all of the places that was used in, which means you need to be able to view the content status and all of the metrics. And of course, you need to be able to distribute these content blocks. You need to be able to localize with these branded templates. You need to be able to package all of this with the guides and everything that's needed for consumption of these assets. And you need to have a distribution plan, whether this is going to be automated, personalized delivery to any of the downstream systems that will be consuming all of these assets that have been created. When I say build modular content from any content type, just think of this, where we say be ambitious and store it. It's not just images and video. For purposes of this, especially in life sciences, this is going to be legal content. It's going to be important safety information. It's going to be a text snippet. It's going to be a claim or evidence of a claim or a study. All of these different things can be pieces of modular content that you're storing. You also want to make sure that you've got the ability to make data-driven content decisions. What this does for you is it gives you the ability to serve up recommended content to the user. You can make legal content and guidelines part of the content process. And I'll show you that in just a moment here. But what this does, you're ensuring your content blocks are compliant by making sure that the assets that are in here have already gone through a MLR process. They're already in place. All of these checklists and the attestations and the evidence that you need are already in here and part of the metadata that somebody can check and ensure that what they're using, they can have confidence in. You also want to build these compound documents with content modules. If you look at this in here, you can see that you've got the ability to swap in and out the different pieces of content in here. You can link them in here, and it's going to give you a supporting structure. You can see that it can be 3D, video, InDesign packages, anything of the like. And what this does is it gives folks who are in this creative cycle, in the creation side of this, the ability to only be served up the content modules that are appropriate for what they're working on and the ones that need and can be utilized for this. And the all-important thing that you need to make sure that you're doing is having relationships, because relationships is really what the fuel is for modular content. If you look at this screenshot here, you can see that there's a template, but what it's doing is it's also giving you all of the assets that are included and any associated PDFs in this, and you have the ability to download those packages. Because again, it's really important for you to have the ability to audit all of the different pieces of content that you have. You need to be able to find a piece and see anything that's in it. So for whatever reason, if you need to pull it back, if you need to be able to provide a report, you can access and know everything that was made up of in each individual piece. And when you look at something like this, the content status and guidelines, you need something in a modular content environment that's going to give you the related usage instructions, your licensing terms, your best practices, anything from your digital rights management standpoint. And you need to be able to find that easily and quickly. Whether or not the assets are approved, when is it going to be expired, what regions can it be used in? And if you look over here on the right, this one gives you your licensing terms. You also have the ability to utilize things like this asset needs to be used in conjunction with and business rules around it. Because what this is going to do is give the user everything they need to know so that they have confidence in using this module in what they're designing. And all of this information is kept and stored all in one central location. And what this does is gives you the all-important auditability. And this is going to allow you to make sure that if anything needs to be pulled back, if you have any other impacted content modules, you can find them easy. You can track back all of your content modules, your usage details, any of your approval statuses, with very detailed audit trails. Because what this is going to do is give you those all-important business insights from the smallest piece of modular content that you have created to the most complex compound that you have as well. But at your fingertips, the ability to know where was that logo used, where was that image used. I'm bringing up brand portals here real quick because it's interesting. Brand portals were sort of the first foray into modular content for many organizations, because if you think about it, that's really what it is. It's logos, it's style guides, it's colors and fonts, and all of those different things that you need to be able to give in a public or semi-public manner for people to be able to utilize what you have that's approved and find out what they can use. So the reason that we talk about brand portals in modular content is because you've probably already started somewhere. You've probably already started by having some content blocks in what you do today. What we're looking for and what the world is shifting to today is taking this concept of breaking down everything, every asset, every font, all of these different things that you utilize, and bringing it to the rest of the content, the rest of the collateral, your digital, your print, breaking those apart as well, so that you have the capability to access anything you need to have your content created in a more effective way. And what that gives you the capability to do is really to localize and personalize everything you're doing. You have a concept of templates, and these templates ensure that you are going to give people the right way the layout needs to be. You're going to give them where the images have to be, the sizing that has to be correct on all of these. And once you have an approved template, an approved asset, you're certainly going to help in your review time. Because that's what you have here, and that's what we're all striving for. You want the ability to give compliance what they need. You're going to give them a document that in it, there's already approved assets that have gone through an MLR process. You've got approved channel-specific templates. You know that this template is going to be used in this channel. Therefore, all of the layout of this has already been pre-approved, and you can give the compliance folks this asset supporting information. Here's the licensing terms. Here's the rules around the asset we put in this. And you're greatly going to reduce the time the MLR folks need to spend going over everything top to bottom. Now, we will, Mark and I will both talk about this in just a moment. You're never going to remove all of that altogether. And everybody on this call is going to have a different group of people, and they're all going to have a different level of risk when they are doing approvals in what they will approve and what they will not approve based on the information rather than going from scratch. However, it's a learning curve, because at some point you're going to find that if you see the approved template, you see the approved assets, and you see all the usage guidelines, you can probably feel pretty confident that everything is going the way that it should. And then the all-important, how do you distribute content at scale? How do you make sure that all of this very important content that you have created is getting out there into the world? Well, you want to be able to use things like Marketing Cloud integrations, Adobe, Salesforce, Sitecore, all of these different tools. Because you've built these different modules and modules of content, you have the capability to push these modules, these approved pieces of content downstream to all of your execution engines, still keep them in a central location, still make them working for you globally, while you have the ability to utilize them locally in the templates in these downstream tools. This is just an example of modular content distribution in action. You can see over here on the left side of your screen, there's a particular, there's an asset in here that is housed in a digital asset management system. It is being created over here, and you've got the ability in an example like this to have something like a Salesforce Einstein automatically pick and look for the best of Primo content module based on the module's characteristics of the targeted user profile. This is a little of the future that you're all seeing here, because what this gives you the capability to do is utilize AI and say, find me the best content for this use. And again, you know that it's approved content, and you know that it is something that you've got confidence in using forward. So when you're working with modular content, you want to make sure that you're keeping track in your mind of the creation, the management, and the distribution. It's not simply just about taking everything that you have today and breaking it apart and storing every element of every document you've ever created as its own piece of content. You want to make sure that you're creating so that you can repurpose and you can keep these blocks and put them in your creative tools to put them at the creative's fingertips. You want to make sure that you're tracking relationships relationships, that you've got the creative and legal approvals that are all in this to make it easier in the end. You need to be able to manage it all. If you're not storing all of this in one central location, it's going to be increasingly difficult for you to manage. You need to have everything in one place so that it's easily searchable and so that you're not recreating everything you've ever done. You need to make sure that you've got a way of you need to make sure that you've got a way from the modular content packages of keeping track of what elements are in each new item that you've created, each new compound item. And you really need to gain inspiration by exploring any other related and similar content modules. This is something that we've seen a lot, excuse me, from a global or regional standpoint. You use a piece of modular content, and it will tell you like items. So you've got, someone's face, it might show you someone else's face so that you've got some diversity in what you're sending and giving you the ability to show you like items. But of course, you need the capability to unleash all of your content, and you need to be able to distribute all of this. And then for this audience, the one most important thing we can say is you need to be able to have all of this at your fingertips for audit purposes, for business insights, and for you to be able to look at everything that you've done and everything that you've created, find out what's working the best for you, find out what your return on investment is, which modules of content are the most effective, which ones are not, and then make business decisions based on that actionable intelligence. And I know this is a lot. There's a lot more to this. We've got a lot of other sessions that are going to deal with modular content and giving you the capability to sort of break down what you do today and use content and think of it in smaller components rather than thinking of top-down, long, business and creative briefs and things of that nature. So we've got a lot of different things and sessions that we'll be talking about with this. But I am very excited to call Mark Davey up to the live stage, because Mark is one of those folks in the world that knows a little bit about everything, but he knows the most about digital asset management and content and modular content. And he is leaned upon by a lot of folks in the life sciences sector, certainly by me for advice in all of this, because there's a lot to it. Mark, before I get into a couple of questions for you, any thoughts on modular content in general and what we've just heard?
Yeah, so you've encapsulated a lot of the touch points. I think there's, like everything, there's some ambiguity. So hopefully we can sort of break that down and disambiguate what modular content is, where it sits in the end-to-end content supply chain or the life cycle. And I've got some sort of hands-on experience there. But one of the things I'd like to sort of start off with is a movement within life sciences called FAIR: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And if you like, that encapsulates this whole end-to-end journey.
I love that. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that we've got some questions in here from the audience, but there's a couple that I'd like to just start out with. So one of them, how far upstream do you think people need to be thinking, organizations need to be thinking about planning for modular content? Is it just as easy as taking every document you've ever created today and breaking up the pieces of it and storing it in a document repository? Is there more to it, and what is the strategy?
Yeah, there's a lot more to it, and I think if you take that, throw it all in approach, you're gonna struggle. So let's break down this FAIR principle: findable. So that's a search problem, which is a data issue. So this is what DAMs do really well. You have a thing called a taxonomy. It's a hierarchical classification tree. And then you have vocabularies, controlled vocabularies. Your brand is a controlled vocabulary. Your audience is a controlled vocabulary. The channels that you're distributing to, the item types, and the campaigns that you're looking at. So this all falls into the findable sort of remit of life sciences. And then you have accessibility. Do you have the rights to this content? Are the right people able to access that content and distribute it out? The channels or the marketing stack is where the interoperability kind of comes into that. And then the modular part is all about reuse and then the ability to share that information. So if we break down, for me, it's a holistic approach, Karen, that you should look at. You should look at the stakeholders you need to bring in. You should do gap analysis and resource audits about what are the pain points that people are struggling with. And I really think that start of that journey is an addendum to the brand guidelines and the brand playbooks that are being developed today. They're highly sophisticated. So, you know, we have standardization of a brand. We have brand logos. We have the corporate logo. We have the color palettes. We have the typography. These things are codified into the playbook itself. So then if you start looking at, let's give an example of an A4 flyer. Now, it's slightly different in America than it is in the rest of the world because we have A4 and you have letters, I think. Is it letters? Yeah, slightly different sizes. So if you're thinking of a global campaign around a flyer, let's say we're starting in English. We have the color palettes, we have the typography. We know that the logo has to be in the top right-hand side and the brand logo in the left-hand side, or whatever that mix is. That's codified by the metrics of that. So these become the component parts of the modular content or the compounds that you're talking about. And if you then start thinking about, okay, what is the construction of an A4 flyer with the brand guidelines? And then what can you use in a variable data way or in a modular way that can be reused once it's ingested and once it has the data around it so it can be findable and accessible. And then the question is, okay, what's the difference between an A4 portrait or a letter in the US that then turns into a landscape? You know, that sort of thinking, just at a base level. I know there's, you know, thousands of different content types in a myriad of channels, but if you start breaking it down from the guideline part and then the ingestion part, so you've got the ideation of this content, you've got the creative part, which is when you start going in, okay, what parts of this creative attributes can we modularize? Then can we templatize them? Then can we treat the different components like copy as a modular asset in and of itself? We know that copy gets translated into various languages. We know that certain brands are different in different countries. The indication might be different in different countries. So the metadata that sits within the vocabularies and the taxonomy forms part of this conversation. But in an end-to-end process, when you're thinking, okay, what is the life cycle journey of this content? And how can we track and measure that? And how can we reutilize? And instead of saying at the A4 example that I gave, from a landscape to a portrait or a portrait to a landscape, how much of the medical legal review process needs to take in and that? It sounds simple, but you need to bring the stakeholders in. You need to think about this FAIR principle and the whole journey. That was a long-winded answer, sorry.
I love the answer. And that's why I love, you know, doing these sessions with you, because I learned something in every one of them as well. You just brought up an excellent question for me. And that's, does this mean that you can't necessarily modularize everything, not every template, not every piece of content? Are there certain things that are more appropriate to be used and findable and searchable and not everything that you have?
So in the brand guidelines view, you know, we know, okay, there is a logo. So the logo itself will not change from a corporate standpoint. So that's already a lockdown module piece of content in a templatized world, or thinking about, okay, there is a foundation on this piece of content. And if we follow a process as much as possible, how much success can we have in terms of, here is the image. This image works in a Western culture, but might not work in an Eastern culture or a Middle Eastern culture. So we're changing the image in here and we might be changing the copy. What's the impact of taking this assembly approach? And then what's the impact on the legal review and compliance part of that?
Well, it's interesting because the next question I was going to go with here is, other industries seem to have a little bit of an easier time with this, because if your template is approved and your content is approved and your channel that you're using that template and that modular content in is approved, you can assume that it's approved. Life sciences has an extra added challenge that you need to see things assembled, because there's The important safety information has to be a particular size. You have to have things, in your eye view. So we're never going, I don't want to say never. At this point, you can't remove final reviews. You can't not have them. But having this approach where the people who are doing the reviews have all of these checkpoints along the way, do you feel like we can put a measurement on the amount of time it takes to approve now when they know that they're not having to go top to bottom?
Yeah. So if you talk to the legal teams in the life science, you get the skinny, because they'll say, how many times do I have to look at the same piece of content? But they don't have any metrics around that piece of content, that modularized piece. And if there is, let's say, there's some kind of reference material that's in the creative, because it has to be there for compliance and government regulations wherever they are, and different regulations. How many times can you say in a modular sense, okay, that has been reviewed by 100 lawyers in 100 companies 100 times? So there's a metric to that. And that helps everyone, because the legal teams will tell you, we're under constant pressure from the brands to move fast on this, but we're
Correct.
doing the same process. We still have to put the eyeballs on the content, the human side of it. But once we get these level of metrics on it, can we automate that through the potential of AI?
So, Mark, I know this is an interesting question, but knowing that this is the way of the future, and knowing that we can start to reduce our review times, and knowing that this is a beneficial process, instead of having a 7-page document that needs to be reviewed top to bottom, you've got individual pieces in it that have been reviewed along the way. How do you start? Where do you start if you are a med device company or a pharma company and you're not yet there on modular content, but you know and can see that this is going to help you in the future? Where do you start? What do you need to have in place? Who gets involved? What does it look like?
So you start with a conversation with your agencies. You understand that most of the creative work is being done in InDesign documents, for instance. And InDesign documents, back in when I started in this world with print and everything else, it was a compound asset. The modular side of it is a sort of a derivation on that theme, but a Primo and other DAM systems, when you ingest InDesign documents, can separate the content out and map it to the metadata that sits within your vocabularies and in your taxonomy. That is a good starting point, because then not only do you have, as you spoke about, the relationship between the main asset, the compound asset, then you have these modular links within the individual components, and you have metadata around that, which then improves the search and findability. The next layer of that is how you visualize the linking of that information. And I think that's something that the FAIR principles, as the whole journey, which isn't just taxonomy, controlled vocabularies, metadata, it's ontologies and knowledge graphs. That world is all coming in. And then there are ways of tracking and using analysis to map the success of all these things, where they are on the channels. And of course, it comes back to getting the taxonomy right. Who's your audience? What is the nomenclature that you should use for that? And how does that work globally? So it's a big piece that you can break down, but by using the A4 example I gave, that's where you sort of want to frame your thinking. It does need metadata around it. Do you have people that understand metadata in your organization to really get the benefit of that? And that is a big question. And I
was just going to ask you that, Mark, because metadata being central to this working, right? You need to know all of the things that I spoke about, the regions it's going to be used in, what's the audience, like you said, the searchability, what piece is going to be appropriate for what I'm creating. So metadata is probably the number one thing you need to start thinking about, because without it, you don't really have a strategy for modular.
Yeah. So do you have a central repository, a DAM system, which is a metadata engine that works very well with content in this interoperable world on these massive amounts of channels and everything else? I think one of the things I've discovered of late is I think there's been a lot of focus on the channels themselves. And I think in the modular approach, And this is where the agencies come into play. It's actually thinking deeper about the content, not just the legal review around the content.
Absolutely. And I know we only have about 1 minute left. So what I would like to do is give you the floor, Mr. Davey. I would like to give you the floor. If you could tell everybody on this call one thing to take away, something, an important note. How do you get started? What do you do next? If this is something that's interesting, where's your next foot forward? Co-creation.
Modular assembly and co-creation under the FAIR principles for life sciences. That's my takeaway today.
I love it. And we are just up here on time. Mark, I want to thank you so much for all of you on this. I think you can probably tell that Mark and I can jam on about digital asset management and content and modular content all day long. I wish we had more time for this. But if anybody is interested in having further conversations with us about this, we are more than happy to. Hopefully you learned a little bit, enough to be interested in what modular content has to offer. We certainly have a lot of information about it from our product team, and I'm very much looking forward to talking to you all in the future. I thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Mark, a pleasure as always.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Primo. Thank you, audience. Take care.